Hey, what's up YouTube? In this video I'm going to show you how to make syrup from start to finish. Now you could spend a lot of money buying professional grade equipment to do this really quickly and efficiently, but you can also do it with stuff you probably already have lying around the house, and that's what I'll show you in this video. I will say this is a lot of work for a relatively small payoff, so if you don't feel like you'll enjoy the process, you might feel like the finished product in the end isn't enough to justify all the time that you'll put in, but I feel like that's true of a lot of hobbies. To make syrup, there are three main steps. First, you've got to collect your sap, and then you're going to boil it down till it reaches 219 degrees, and after that, you're going to filter it. So my friend and I decided to tackle this process for the first time last year, and we wanted to keep it as inexpensive as possible. So we only bought this food grade tubing that you see in my hand, and I had to get a food thermometer also. Last year I tapped only black walnut trees, which they give a syrup that tastes a little bit more like butterscotch, sort of a mixture of butterscotch and maple syrup. So I collected 7 gallons of sap and I boiled it down. You see here the unfiltered finished syrup. Does not look very appetizing. And then after running it through the filter, it's hard to believe, but this is actually the same syrup post-filtering. Like I said before, there's only really 3 main steps in making syrup, but the step that takes the longest by far is boiling down your sap. If you take a sugar maple tree and you collect 40 gallons of sap, you're going to end up with roughly 1 gallon of finished syrup. And then for black walnut and Norway maple, which is what I tapped this year, that's closer to a 50-to-1 ratio. So every 50 drops of sap that you collect, you will only get 1 drop of finished syrup. This year I was able to get a pretty good deal on this style tap. And I went ahead and got them because, as you can see here, the drill bit that I was able to use with it is a little bit smaller than the drill bit I had to use just inserting that tubing directly into the tree. So it was a little bit easier on the trees. In terms of when to tap, you want to wait until your daytime highs are getting into the upper 30s and 40s, and your nighttime lows are still dipping below freezing. Around here, that was about middle of February. You can see in this shot my basic setup. There is a screw which is holding the jug of sap, and then the tubing goes up from there into the tap. So the flow of maple sap is quite a bit faster than the flow of the black walnut sap. My mom was a real trooper. She went out 2 times a day and emptied these jugs, and depending on the temperatures, sometimes these jugs were overflowing both times that she went out during the day, which is a lot more than I was expecting. And then she also brought the sap over to my house then. As I was pouring it into the coolers, I would just run it through this fine mesh filter. You'll find that some ants end up in the sap and also some little pieces of branches and leaves in that, so just filter it before you store it. And then I stored these coolers on the shady side of my house just to try to keep the sap as cool as possible. At night, the nighttime temperatures were still dropping below freezing, so I was able to open the lids at night just to try to freeze that top surface layer of the sap. And then during the day, when the temperatures were hotter, I closed up the lids and it kept nice and cold in there. You really want to try to get your sap boiled within a week, otherwise it will start to go bad. As you can see in this shot, this second year I also used a propane burner to do the boiling. I had purchased this last year to do corn on the cob and applesauce, and I was real hopeful that it would really make the process very fast and efficient. Ultimately, the propane itself was so expensive that my last batch of maple syrup this year, I went back to doing it over the campfire. It just got too pricey, but I will talk about that later in the video. Also, I should note that if you have a pan with better surface area, maybe a big roasting pan or something, that would be a better option than these pots that I was using. But as I said, I was just trying to use mostly what I had lying around the house. Regardless of how you go about it, you've got a lot of boiling to do. As I said before, you're going to end up with 1/40th or 1/50th of what you started with. And you don't really have to check the temperature at this point of the process. The water is going to keep evaporating off and sort of hold your sap at about 212 degrees. And once the sugar content gets higher, that's when you'll start to see the color of your sap starting to turn a little bit more of a golden brown color. And that's when you'll want to start checking your temperature. As I saw it, and I wasn't always standing next to the pot while it was boiling, but as I saw it, I tried to skim off some of the nasty looking scum that would float to the surface. When the syrup had reached about 217 degrees, I filtered it and then I brought it inside to finish on the stovetop, which is a little bit more precise temperature control wise than both the fire and the propane burner. At this point in the process, you've already spent a ton of time and energy in this, and you really want to make sure you don't burn it here. When your syrup reaches 219 degrees, it's going to be time to take it off the stovetop. As you can see here, I didn't invest in any special filters for this last part of the process. I just had that metal strainer I had been using throughout this video, and then I put a coffee filter inside of that. At first the sap is going to flow down through there pretty quickly, but then as the filter gets clogged up, it's going to really slow down. Actually, the last round of syrup that I did this year, I just put the whole filtering setup in the fridge overnight and came back to it in the morning, and it had dripped all the way through. And here you have the finished product. The jar in the middle, the lightest one, that was my first batch, and then my two outside jars here were from my second batch. I don't understand all the science behind it, but late syrup tends to be a little bit darker than the early syrup. Don't leave just yet. I have a few disclaimers and then also some suggestions if you're hoping to tackle this process yourself. I said it before and I'm going to say it again. This is a lot of work. I was hopeful that the propane burner would speed up the process quite a bit this year, and it did speed it up a little bit, but I blew through $45 of propane boiling down the 40 gallons approximately of sap that I had at the beginning of this video. For my last batch, I went back to old school campfire method because I happen to have this junk wood lying around anyway, and I refused to go back to get another propane fill up. So was it worth it? I would say yes, it was worth it, but truthfully by the end of my second batch this year, it was starting to feel a lot more like work. I had a couple nights that I just really wanted to go to bed, ended up standing outside in the freezing, windy nights trying to boil down sap. And if I had one recommendation for you, I would say try to collect maybe 5 to 7, maybe 10 gallons of sap your first year, and you should be able to boil that down, bring it inside, finish it, and then filter it and get to bed at a fairly decent hour with one day's work. So I think that's it. If you have any questions, certainly post them down in the questions, and I'll post any additional information that I think of in the description of this video. Please like this video if it was helpful, and be sure to subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching.